What they do is they clog the body up,
Yes.
they stop our mitochondria functioning.
Mm-hmm.
What they do is they basically lead to all of the conditions that are essentially the diseases of civilization, the metabolic condition. So where we talked about the heart disease, the cancer, where we talk about obesity, where we talk about type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, and any other inflammatory condition or metabolic condition, it's the effect on the mitochondria, so it's the PUFAs affecting the mitochondria, causing all those diseases.
So welcome back to The Peak's Life. It's little bite-sized chunks of wellness wisdom to power you through or caution you through your day. And today we're talking the cautionary tale.
We are indeed.
And the reason why is we have a lot of people who transition to keto, and keto is known as a high-fat diet. And so they go, right, that's great, I just need to increase my fats, which you do. However, it is high healthy fats. And there's still a big misunderstanding as to what are the healthy fats that fit within the keto diet. And if you don't have those healthy fats and you get it wrong, you get the shit fats, then you're actually doing far worse for your body than going onto the keto diet and revolutionizing your wellness. So today I want to really drill down on what are the healthy fats. We kind of know those, but let's do the scare on what are the unhealthy fats, the bad fats that people probably have in their diet now that they need to be aware of and take out when they move to keto.
And let me just drill into that for a second.
Drill.
Before we get into, I know you've got lots of questions for me on
so
this
many
one.
questions.
But I think this is anybody who does dirty keto.
Dirty people.
Anybody that does lazy keto.
Lazy people.
This is for you.
This is for you.
This is
naughty
especially for you. This episode is one you must listen to. I
can hear the keyboard warriors now going, Mike and Lynn, rah, 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 rah. You don't understand. Yes, we do.
We do. And, you are right, Mike. A lot of people go onto keto. They think that, they've heard about it. They understand that they can lose weight, that they can reduce inflammation, that they can reduce disease, they can reverse type 2 diabetes. And basically what they understand is that I've just got to get my macros right. My macros are, say 75% fat, maybe 20% protein, and then 5% of carbohydrates. And so they work those out, and they go to their cupboard and they use what's ever in the cupboard as long as it fits into the fat, protein and carbohydrate category.
Bad move.
And that's, a lot of that is because they are basically going off what they've been taught, what they were taught at school. Kids at school are taught the right things to eat and not to eat. And they've eaten like this for their whole life probably. So they're using the foods that they've always used, just fitting them into those macros.
Yes.
And then, as I mentioned, the reason that dirty and lazy keto is because those particular keto variants especially are the ones where you may be using a lot of these unhealthy fats and not realizing. So if you are doing especially the dirty keto, like I said, you must listen. Please listen to the end. There's some super important information in here that just might make you rethink dirty keto, because you're doing a great thing for your body with the macros, but you may not be doing as much as you think. You may not be removing your disease potential.
Yes.
You might lose weight, but still end up getting cancer. So listen in.
Yes. All fats are not the same.
All fats were not created equal.
Some fats are very cheap and we use them because they're there. However, we move to keto, one of the first things we need to do is do a fat audit. I love audits. A fat audit. Have a look at what fats are in your pantry or fridge and make sure you've got the right fats. And let's kick off with some stats. I think the stats really drill it home as to why we need to sit up and take notice of this particular area, especially the dirty keto, especially people who have allowed some of those shit fats to stay in their diet. They may not realise the implications of that. So hit us with a stat.
All right, so the first thing I want to tell you is that if we go back to 1900, all right, so not many people on the planet who've been around since 1900, but if we go all the way back and we look at the records, what we see in the records is that 15% of deaths, that's 15% of deaths at that time were due to heart disease and cancer.
Okay, quite a small percentage.
Quite a small percentage.
Yes.
If we jump forward to 2010, 70% of deaths were due to heart disease and cancer. So we are looking at a relatively short period of time. That's 110 years. Like I said, there are a few people, around who were born around that time. In 110 years, we went from 15% to 70% of deaths from heart disease and cancer.
Wow, okay.
And if you look at around that time, so around the 1900, we look at all of the diseases that cause deaths.
Yes.
They were typically more of the communicable diseases, the infectious diseases.
Yes.
Whereas the top causes of deaths have moved now. We're now into the heart disease, cancer being the top causes of deaths all around the world, particularly in the US, but all around the world.
So these stats are US or global stats?
I've got a mixture here. I've got a mixture here today. I'm going to talk about China and Asia and all sorts of places.
Wow, so we've gone from 15% to 70% from the just percentage of deaths. Give us another stat that's going to make us sit up and take note.
So let's drill into that heart disease one.
Okay.
Right, so this is one that's close to my heart, excuse the pun. So my father died of heart disease.
Yes.
Right, and he died, when was that? 1980. He died of heart disease. Now, if we go back a bit further than 1980 to 1811. So
wow.
Going back in the history books.
A couple hundred years, yep.
A couple hundred years. Go back 200 years. And what we find is that there's almost no heart disease recorded at that time.
Okay.
Almost none.
Wow.
Right?
Interesting. Yes.
Almost none. We jump forward to 1930. So in the 1930s, heart disease had become the top cause of death in the US.
Wow. Okay. From almost negligible to the top cause.
We'd gone from nothing to the top cause of death in the US was heart disease.
And that's the 1930s.
That was 1930s.
Right.
So that already was 1930s. If we go forward even further back to 2010, so we're only talking 9 years ago, 9 years ago, 1 in every 3 deaths in the US was because of heart disease.
Wow, okay, interesting.
So think about your 3 closest friends, or your 2 closest friends. Out of the 3 of you, 1 of you is likely to die from heart disease.
Scary, isn't it? Very, very scary.
That's what the statistics tell us.
Yes.
So that's heart disease.
Okay, go with cancer, because cancer is always a popular topic.
Cancer, and we all dread cancer. So
we do.
Again, think about your family and friends. Do you know somebody who's had cancer? The chances are you do. It's a devastating disease. It's devastating for the individuals who have it, and it's devastating for the families. Now, again, if we go all the way back to 1811, we find that there's almost no cancer.
Right.
Almost zero cancer. So 1811, 200-ish years ago, there is no cancer.
Fascinating.
We go forward again, we're talking about the US now, we go forward to the 1900s. And what we find is about 1 in 17 deaths are from cancer. So we've got some cancer has crept in.
But still not significant. 1 in 17 is
there. It's there, but it's not that significant.
Spiked.
Guess what's happened by 2010?
I think it's significantly more than 1 in 17.
It's 1 in 3.
Wow. So 1 in 3 heart disease, 1 in 3 cancer.
So again, put your 2 closest friends and yourself together. Out of the 3 of you, 1 will die of heart disease and 1 will die of cancer.
So bend over, kiss your butt goodbye.
That's it.
2 out of 3 of you, cancer, heart disease.
Heart disease.
Fantastic.
So we've gone from nothing in 200 years. 200 years is nothing when it comes to history.
Yes.
And in 200 odd years, we've gone from nothing to 1 out of 3 people in the US will die of heart disease. 1 out of 3 people will die of cancer. That's a phenomenal rise.
So you've scared the heck out of us with cancer and with heart disease. Talk to me about obesity. So a lot of people tuning in are thinking or losing weight, and the obesity thing is something that's very much top of mind for them. Give us some stats.
It is. So again, if we go back to around about 1800, what we see is the rates of obesity are around 1%. And I encourage you to think back to those, you've seen those old sepia photographs of, pre-Civil War, or you might have somebody in your family who was, in one of the forces.
Yeah.
And they're all skinny as.
There wasn't a lot of fat people back then, was there?
There wasn't a lot of fat people. They were all very, very skinny.
A bit hungry, but they were fat. But they were skinny.
They may have been. I don't know, were they hungry or were they just skinny? But you look at it, 1% obesity
Yes.
was
Which
what we're
makes
looking
sense.
at.
So
We're
that
very,
those
very-
photos play out, because if you're doing 1% of the population obese,
That's
you're going to
it.
get a group photo with 1 out of 100 is going to be in the obesity category.
That's it. So
Yes.
very low rates of overweight and very low rates of obesity.
Walk us forward and scare the heck out of us.
We're going to jump right through to 2015.
Yes.
And we're now at 40% obesity.
Wow.
And this is, again, that's a US statistic.
Wow.
But it's these statistics don't only apply to the US. What we see is we see this through developed countries, developing countries. We see it in places like China. They have a massive problem with sickness, cancer, heart disease, and obesity.
Okay, so 1800s-ish, we had minimal heart disease, minimal cancer, minimal obesity. Move us forward 100 to 200 years and we have 1 in 3 deaths in cancer, 1 in 3 deaths in heart disease, half the population obese. What happened in the timeline? Talk to me about the shit fats that happened in that timeline that have a direct correlation to those stats.
So I'm going to give you the headline.
Good.
We got processed food. We got processed food. That is the big change. But let me break it down to make it real clear where this processed food came from.
Yes.
The first one was sugar. So sugar was introduced in 1822.
Okay, before that we were safe, and then the sugar came into our lives.
So we may have had some natural sources of sugar. You know, we there was honey
Molasses,
around.
those sort of things.
You know, people did make small quantities of sugary type substances. You may have had some maple syrup. So some of these products go back way
We're
back.
talking about commercial sugar.
But what we're talking about is refined commercial sugar produced in quantities that the masses could get hold of it every day.
And
That was
affordable too.
And affordable. So that was 1822.
Yep.
We got our refined white sugar.
Right.
So that's about 200 years ago.
Yeah, things started to go wrong after that, didn't they?
And at that point, remember the statistics, around about 200 years ago, we didn't have cancer, we didn't have heart disease, we didn't have obesity, at least not at the point we're at now with a crisis. So we had no sugar, we had no cancer, heart disease, obesity. So that's the first thing I want you to think about. The second one we got was in 1865. So this is after the American Civil War.
Okay,
They
yes.
found a way to produce cottonseed oil. And this is the first
interesting.
manufactured industrial seed oil. So it's the first time they really took, again, in a refinery, in a chemical process, they made an oil for human consumption. And it was cottonseed.
Right.
So that was 1865. Now, the next thing that came along was refined wheat flour. We basically got the ability to take big rollers and grind our wheat down to a very fine powder that then became flour. And that was around the 1880s.
Wow, okay.
So it was only in the 80s, all the people that say that, you know, carbs have been around a lot longer. Yes, some of the vegetables have been around a lot longer. But in terms of the wheat flour as we know it, it only came around in the 1880s.
Wow.
When we started to become an industrialised nation. We started to put in place industrial processes, not only to change our factory, our cottage industries, we put them in place for our food as well. So we started to address, food shortages with these industrial processes. So we started to grind wheat and make flour in the 1880s.
So minimal disease in the 1900s, introduced sugar, introduced processed foods, introduced industrial oils, and the shit hits the fan.
And then we've got another one.
Oh, another one.
So we had the 1822, the 1865, the 1880s, and then we got 1911. Procter & Gamble introduced Crisco.
Oh, Crisco and all these
You
friends.
all know Crisco.
Yes.
Crisco is what your mum used to cook with,
Yes.
and it's been around since 1911, and it's basically where we got trans fat.
Wow.
And these really are the dangerous fats. These
Yes.
are the ones that are extremely toxic to the body,
Yes.
carcinogenic. We didn't know that at the time, but Procter & Gamble introduced that. So one of the big food companies introduced it. And there we go, we've got the 4 ingredients for processed food. We've got those industrial seed oils, we've got the trans fats, we've got the flour, and we've got the sugar. Those are your basic ingredients for a lot of our bakery products, our cereals, for our processed and packaged goods.
Yeah.
And if we leap forward to 2009, I know I'm all over the place with these numbers, in 2009, 10 years ago, 63% of the average American diet was processed foods.
Wow. Okay.
All right, so we go back early 1800s, no disease of the type we're talking about, no cancer, no heart disease, no obesity.
No processed foods?
Yes, there were communicable diseases.
Yes.
Yes, there were things like influenza, there was pneumonia, there was tuberculosis.
Yes.
But we're talking here the diseases of civilization. We're talking about the metabolic diseases, the cancers, the heart attacks, the obesity. None of that existed in 1800. We introduced those 4 foods. We got to make processed foods, processed and packaged foods. In 2009, they are making up 63% of the average American's diet. And then we know 1 in 3 people are going to die of heart attacks, 1 in 3 are dying of cancer, and like, as you said, almost half of the population is obese.
You just cannot ignore those statistics, can you?
That's pretty compelling, isn't it?
It's pretty compelling. So what is in the processed food? So we hear this term PUFAs, we hear the term omega-6s. So walk us through what's the bad stuff in there and what they actually do, which is taking us back to the start of this episode where we were talking about the good fats and the bad fats and how to make sure your keto diet has the good fats and we totally get rid of the bad fats.
Yeah.
Talk about PUFAs. I see PUFAs written everywhere.
All right, well, so let me just explain. The reason that we're going to focus on the PUFAs and the oils
Yes.
is because if you've gone on to keto,
Yes.
then you've already removed the wheat.
Yes.
So well done. You've
Good
got rid of one of those 4.
Yes.
You've already got rid of the sugar.
Yes.
You've got rid of a second of the 4. But you've got fat in your diet.
So you've got options for fat, so it's making the right choice.
So this is where we, as you said right at the start, Mike, this is about how do you make the right choices.
Excellent.
And we've got different types of fat. Okay, so we've got saturated fats and then we've got unsaturated fats. Now, saturated fats are typically the ones that are solid, naturally solid. They come from the animal sources.
Yes.
There's 1 or 2 plant sources, but usually animal sources. And they're solid at room temperature.
Okay.
So what I'm talking about here would be butter.
Right.
So you think about butter, if I take a block of butter out of the fridge and I sit it on my worktop, what happens to it?
It doesn't change. It stays
Doesn't
there.
change.
Yeah.
It stays as a solid,
Stays-
right?
Yes.
And it's naturally a solid because when we blend milk or cream and we remove the waters and we just churn that, we naturally get that solid fat produced. We're taking off all of the milk proteins and we're left just with the fat, which is a solid at room temperature.
Good.
So it might go a bit soft, but it's still going to be a
Absolutely.
solid.
Yep.
Right, so the first thing is the saturated fats are usually solid. So in this case, solid and natural from an animal source equals healthy.
Right.
So butter, ghee.
Yes.
Ghee is clarified butter. It's just had the last of the lactose taken out of it.
Same but different.
Same. And tallow is another good example of a natural animal fat. So tallow is the beef fat.
Yes.
So if you cook beef, you get the fat coming off it. When you take it away and you basically cool it down, that turns into a pure white solid fat.
Good. So they're the good fats.
They're the
Saturated
great
good
fats.
fats, the butter, the ghee, the tallow. They're the ones that we should include in the keto diet. And they're the ones that won't harm our body and highly recommended. And then on the other side...
So the reason they're really good,
Yes.
saturated fat is super important in the body.
Yes.
A lot of your cells depend, or all of your cells depend on saturated fat. Cholesterol is transported around the body on saturated fat. If you don't have saturated fat, you fall apart literally.
Okay.
So as we see degeneration in the body, it's usually a lack of saturated fat.
Wow.
So those 3 that we talked about, the butter, the ghee and the tallow,
Yes.
they are made up of mostly saturated fat with just a small amount of other fats. So
Okay.
we're looking for the very high percentage saturated fat. The other thing that's really important with them is that they're unsaturated fat, in particular their polyunsaturated fatty acid, PUFA.
Polyunsaturated fatty. Okay.
PUFA, so PUFA, PUFA. PUFA is down at about 2%. So
Okay.
when cattle are fed with grass and the butter is produced or the ghee is produced or we eat the fat of the meat, we're getting about 2% polyunsaturated fatty acid. So what we've got is lots and lots of healthy saturated fat,
It's a very small percentage.
tiny percentage of that unsaturated, that PUFA fat, that's the omega-6. So if we go back to our, statistics 200 years ago, what did people eat? The fats that they used were the natural animal fats, the beef fat, the tallow, the fat off the meat,
Yes.
the butter and the ghee.
The saturated fats with very little PUFA.
Very little PUFA. So that's the saturated fat, that's good. Some people will be saying at this point, what about coconut oil? And yes, coconut oil is a solid generally at most temperatures, and it is largely a saturated fat.
Excellent.
So it's probably the one exception because it's one of the only plant fats that we put in that healthy category.
Excellent.
So that's why we see it a lot in the keto diet.
And on the dark side, where the industrial oils live, what happens there?
Well, there we've got all of the industrial seed oils, which are very, very high in PUFA, very high in omegas, so omega-6 particularly.
Yes.
So if we look, for example, we're talking about, I've got to get my list of these right, cottonseed oil, we're talking about safflower oil, sunflower oil, we're talking about
There's lots of flaxseed.
flaxseed oil, all of those basically processed oils.
Yes.
The way you recognise them is go to the supermarket, look along the supermarket shelves, and these are all the light yellow coloured oils.
Yes.
They're always liquid at room temperature.
Yes.
Always liquid. So these are liquid, they're light yellow in colour, and they're usually very cheap. The reason is they're produced by the big food companies, they're produced in a chemical facility, and they are basically manufactured, and they're manufactured incredibly cheaply.
And I presume because they're cheap and they're easily available, if you go to restaurants or takeaways or anywhere you eat out or have food made for you, that's what they're going to be using. They're not going to be using the healthy fats because it's just not commercially viable, is it?
So if you're going to anything apart from a high-end restaurant,
Yes.
it's likely that you'll see industrial seed oils used. And because, by the way, the health associations, the American Heart Association, has told us to use these fats. Like, they've been telling us to use these industrial seed oils for years, basically because the research was all funded by the food companies. So we've been told to use them. They are cheap. So yes, you go to a restaurant, it will be probably an industrial seed oil. You go to a junk food place, go and get your meal from Macca's or from Burger King or any of the fast food outlets, they will be frying in industrial seed oils. They couldn't sell you a burger for $2 if it wasn't fried in industrial seed oil.
Made with butter.
It was made with beautiful grass-fed butter.
Wouldn't work.
Would probably be about $6. So the reason your junk food's cheap
Yes.
is because they're using cheap, low-quality ingredients.
Yes.
So this is why we said if you're doing dirty keto, guys, listen up because your food is full of this stuff. Now, why are industrial seed oils bad? Because they contain anywhere between 15 and 70% of PUFA,
Right.
polyunsaturated fatty acid.
Wow.
And by the way, I'm also including in this category things like margarine,
Okay.
because margarine is not a natural animal fat, it's a plant fat. It's been hydrogenated, that means it's been chemically modified, and in that chemical modification it's gone from that light oil to a solid product. It's the same stuff, it's just been solidified artificially.
Yes, to make it look different.
To make it look different.
To make it look like trick butter.
So you can spread it on your bread. So when you've got your wheat and you've got your artificial butter,
Yes.
then you've got a double whammy of a hard, unhealthy combo. So it's really important, I think, that people realise that we've got all those nasty fats.
Yes.
And it's probably really important to explain why they're so bad.
Well, that was my next question, because we've obviously got the low PUFAs in the healthy fats, and so we're saying that's great. And then these industrial oils, and there's a huge list, and unfortunately they're cheap and they're available, and we find them everywhere. And you're saying that 15 to 70% of them have, or 15 to 70% of PUFAs in these oils, so we should avoid them. But why? What does the PUFA or the omega-6 do to us? How does it kill us?
Well, let me just give you a list of problems with polyunsaturated fatty
I
acids.
bet it's a long list.
PUFAs.
The PUFAs.
I mean, basically omega-6, to put it very simply, omega-6 clog up your body.
Okay.
They clog up your body, your cells, and in particular your mitochondria.
Okay.
So the mitochondria are the little energy powerhouses in the body, and they're the things that basically keep everything working correctly.
Right.
So when we talk about our metabolism, the mitochondria are responsible for metabolism. They're responsible for the energy production in the body. So when we start to think about metabolic conditions, if the mitochondria don't work well, then essentially our metabolism doesn't work well and we get metabolic conditions. What the omega-6s do is they basically screw up the poor little mitochondria.
Wow. Okay.
They really, there's a really beautiful term actually, and it's FUBAR. FUBAR comes from the German, and it's basically, it stands for fouled up beyond all recognition. FUBAR. So imagine you've got a pipe.
Yes.
And it's clogged up and you can't see it. It's a drain pipe. Sometimes your drains get clogged up.
Yes.
With all the fats and things that you put down the sink.
Yes.
Just imagine your drain being completely clogged up and you can't even see through it. Well, that's basically what omega-6s do to your body. They clog it up, they stop it working, they stop all those little energy cells working. And if we were to classify these omega-6s, the sort of labels we put on them, we'd say they are cytotoxic, they are genotoxic, they are mutagenic, they are carcinogenic, they are thrombogenic. Any of those terms that I can come up with, they are poisons, and they should be labelled poison.
Wow.
In fact, you probably don't realise this, but they are anywhere between 20 and 100 times more toxic than a cigarette.
Wow. Okay.
They contain the same toxins that cigarettes contain.
Wow, that's amazing.
But at much higher levels. So when we're eating our foods that have got, that have been cooked in these fats or use these fats, we are consuming more than more than cigarettes would be if we were smoking cigarettes.
Wow.
And the half-life of these toxic compounds is anywhere up to about 2 years.
Wow.
So it could take 6 to 8 years to get rid of them from your system.
Amazing.
So that's bad for adults. Think about what it's like for kids.
Absolutely. And so many kids take on these industrial oils every day, and so we're starting our kids off, and if it's a half-life of 2 years, it's going to take years before their bodies, even if they stopped today, years before their bodies were free of these toxins. So through their growing years.
Exactly, through their growing years when they're growing and developing.
Yes.
Just imagine, look at your kids at the moment, think about it, they're full of these toxic compounds. It might take the next 6 to 8 years, during which time they could be suffering obesity, cancer, heart disease, metabolic conditions. So these really are nasty toxic materials, and the only reason they're not labelled toxic is because they don't poison you acutely. You won't end up in the ER.
Right.
But over the period of years, you are getting toxic exposure, so they're chronically toxic.
Okay, and if they're acute, they'd be labelled poison and off the shelf. But because they're chronic, we get away with it.
That's exactly
All right.
right.
So what do the omega-6s and the PUFAs do? What are the diseases or the illnesses and the long list of bad things that can occur if we saturate our body with these PUFAs?
So given what I just explained, given that what they do is they clog the body up,
Yes.
they stop our mitochondria functioning, what they do is they basically lead to all of the conditions that are essentially the diseases of civilization, the metabolic condition. So where we talked about the heart disease, the cancer, where we talk about obesity, where we talk about type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, and any other inflammatory condition or metabolic condition, it's the effect on the mitochondria, so it's the PUFAs affecting the mitochondria, causing all those diseases. So bring it right back to where we started, those statistics that say 1 in 3 Americans will die of heart disease, 1 in 3 Americans will die from cancer, at least 1 in 2, about 1 in 2 Americans is obese. Those conditions, the heart disease, cancer, obesity, plus the type 2 diabetes, the Alzheimer's, the Parkinson's, the metabolic conditions, all caused by consumption of PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids. those are in our industrial seed oils at percentages up to 70%.
Wow. So the great news, because you've depressed everyone, scared the shit out of most people and depressed everyone. The great news is if you get keto right, then you'll remove all those the processed foods, the sugars, the carbohydrates, and you remove the industrial oils and anything that is going to cause these illnesses. But where we started this conversation, one of the reasons for this chat today is we have some people who still go onto keto, whether it's dirty or lazy keto. They go onto keto, but they don't clean out the shit fats, and they continue and they're not getting the full benefits of keto, and they're not getting the toxins out of their body.
That's exactly right. So if you want to do keto right,
Yes.
you want to lose weight, you want to get the energy benefit,
Yes.
and maybe you're one of those people who've started keto and you're not feeling the benefits, you don't feel the energy, you haven't lost weight, have a really good look at the fats that you're having. That's 75% of your diet that's made up of fats. Choose the healthy fats. The animal fats are the best. So go for the beef fat, go for the tallow, the butter and the ghee, perhaps some coconut oil, and then really be careful to eliminate all of those industrial seed oils like the cottonseed oil, the flaxseed oil, the safflower, the canola oil. Get rid of all those, because not only will they derail your keto journey, they'll also potentially lead you into these metabolic conditions.
So a fascinating but scary bite-sized chunk of wellness wisdom. Another great little Peaks Life episode. Join us again next time. Thanks for your time. Talk to you soon.